everything Lewis has written. So I was debating, does it make sense for me to just read this paper to you? No, it doesn't make sense for me to just read this paper to you. You haven't read half the things, 3/4 of the things, 9/10 of the things that we are going to be referencing. So I went, okay, well, how can we back it up? And I'll just give you the overview of what the conference's theme was, is what does it mean to live a good life? And so the idea was, the different ways we try to answer what a good life is, the different metrics we try to measure it by, and then the attempts that we make at it, and then fundamentally, how does Lewis answer this question? Does he answer this question? There were all kinds of interesting papers that were written about it. I thought it was the most obvious thing in the world, that Lewis wrote this in one place, and it was pretty clear. And that's in this sermon called The Weight of Glory. So this is a book that is a number of essays and sermons put into it. There's like 10 or 12, and it's titled The Weight of Glory, but it's named after the first chapter, which is a sermon he gave called The Weight of Glory. To me, this is the best thing Lewis ever wrote. I get goosebumps every time I read it. It's about 30 pages. It'll take you longer to read this than the book of Ruth, as Pastor Derek was saying earlier. It genuinely just gives me hope for the world. It gives me hope for myself. It gives me hope in just about every possible way, and it helps recontextualize what it means to live as a follower of Jesus to me. So this sermon, The Weight of Glory, to me is the fundamental thing for understanding C.S. Lewis. Because I think if you read The Weight of Glory, then you get a glimpse into who Lewis is and what he thinks. So I don't have a PowerPoint for you or anything. I'm trusting your attention spans, but I also trust you to raise your hand and ask a question in the middle of things. I'm going to walk through my paper without reading it to you, but I'm just going to point to a few big ideas that hopefully will, at the end of this, lead you to at least wanting to read The Weight of Glory to hear what Lewis said himself. So first being that, C.S. Lewis, if you haven't read anything, raise your hand if you have never read anything by C.S. Lewis. Even our teens, you all have read something? I'm so proud. So proud. Great. Lewis wrote primarily in the 20th century, right, in the 1900s. He lived through World War I, where he served with many of his friends that passed away in the war. He lived through World War II. He missed the draft by 3 years or so. And so in the midst of all that, Lewis became a very popular Christian apologist, writing about what it means to live out the faith and how do we believe. But that was not the primary interest of his work. He was a lecturer in Oxford. He was a literature and philosophy professor. He was best friends with J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, amongst other people, but that's the most notable. Lewis was an academic through and through, but he was also thinking primarily about what does it mean for us to live out the faith. And I think when the term apologist is used, and that term is usually used for people that use logical arguments to defend the existence of God, I think that reduces C.S. Lewis in a terrible way to something that was really he was doing on the side in the grand scheme of things. And so the first thing I want to point to is a quote from a book called Miracles. Lewis uses this book to talk about not did or did not miracles occur, but why miracles should be viewed as possible if we believe God exists. It is one of the least exciting things to read by Lewis. I would put it at number 9 on your list if you're going to read more C.S. Lewis. It's very dense. He makes a very important argument, ironically, in a chapter that was written as a standalone article he put in the book later. So the best part of the book was never part of the book originally. But he talks about this idea called the grand miracle. He says, of all the miracles, turning water into wine, of multiplying the bread and the fish, these are all obvious things. If we believe in God, God can do any miracle. That makes sense. But the grand miracle is the incarnation. And this quote from the book Miracles, he's talking about the grand miracle as if, imagine you had listened to the same piece of music your entire life, and you loved this piece of music. And then one day, someone said, hey, I actually found a missing piece of sheet music. It's actually not just any piece of sheet music, it is the central piece of the music. That's what the grand miracle is like. Or your favorite novel you've read your entire life, your favorite one that it just moves you, and someone says, hey, I found the missing chapter of this novel. It's the most important chapter. It changes everything that came before. It's the plot twist at the end of the movie. It's the crescendo. It's the build. You have to have this chapter. He says the only way that this could work, the missing sheet music, the missing chapter, the only way it could work is if it not only made more sense of the piece of work, but that it recontextualized everything to make it fit together better. And Lewis says that's what the grand miracle is, or the incarnation of Jesus is. When we look at the state of the world, and we look at what is building towards the incarnation in the Gospels, we see this longing for something more. And when we see what it means for God not to just be this far-off, infinite being, but rather this personal being that chooses to be with us in the flesh, on earth, in the midst of hardship and homelessness and hunger and fatigue, there's something about the incarnation of Jesus that makes sense of the whole story. In the same way Lewis talks about that in the book Miracles, I believe that Lewis's work, The Weight of Glory, is the same kind of missing chapter for all of his work. I think The Weight of Glory is the key to understand everything about Lewis. Now, one of the many ways I thought about giving this presentation was literally just reading his sermon to you verbatim. And I would have loved to do that, but I think that would have been a little cheap. If I had a second week, I would be doing that, but I won't do that today. But I will walk through some of the key ideas. So in The Weight of Glory, the first big idea that Lewis makes is that in the modern day, now remember he's writing this in the 1940s and 50s, but we're still close enough. He says one of the issues in the modern day is that many Christians view their faith as an act of avoiding enjoyment. It's a very fascinating thing, this idea of abstinence. We need to remove joy from our lives as if enjoyment of things is inherently bad. And he says that that's actually a complete mistake. What we do see in the scriptures is that we are called to avoid certain things and to restrain ourselves from certain things, but never as an end in itself. And the idea of viewing avoiding enjoyment as an end in and of itself is completely missing what our lives are supposed to be. And he says, there's many famous quotes you've probably heard from this sermon, but this is one of the primary ones. He's talking about desire. And this is one of the through lines in all of Lewis's work. He says that our desires, sometimes the church, capital C, has said, well, you're desiring the wrong stuff, that your desires are too strong. You need to tame your desires. You need to reel them in. What Lewis says, actually, it turns out that our desires are not too strong, they're too weak. The things that we think are good for us, the things that we think are going to bring us satisfaction, rarely do. And so what ends up happening, he says, I'll read this quote directly. He says, we mess around with things like sex and drink when infinite joy is offered to us. It's not that our desires are too strong, they're attached to the wrong objects. He says, we're kind of like small children that are just insisting on playing in the mud rather than going on vacation to the beach. He says, we have no concept of what the beach is like. You're just stuck in the mud. And the mud is fun. You enjoy the mud. But your desires are settling for something so much smaller than what you were made for, which begs the question, what were you made for? One of the primary things this sermon is building around is this idea that we have all of these desires, but none of them are attached to the true object of our desires. So, spoiler alert, you can probably guess he would say that true desire is God. That's what we were made for. But in fact, every single thing you desire is just an echo of your desire to be closer to God. When you enjoy things, it is a glimpse of the joy we have in our relationship with God and the joy we were made for. In every category. And this is where Lewis gets controversial, which is interesting how many churches love him despite him saying controversial things. I think they're just not reading him very closely. Lewis is saying the worst thing that you do, even that, when you experience joy in it, is a glimpse of the joy you're really pursuing. Think about the best piece of music, your favorite song, or your favorite thing you've ever eaten, or your favorite vacation you've ever been on. It's just 10 out of 10 experience. And you have that experience. And you would think that would satisfy you, but it doesn't. Maybe in the moment you are, but it could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be a year. You're not satisfied. You want either that same thing again or you want something more than it. So often we look forward to something and we finally get the thing we looked forward to, and it's not satisfying. It just reminds us for a moment that there's more stuff that we wish we had. And Lewis is saying that's because our desires are all lowercase d desires. They're pointing us to the true desire we were made for. And if we put them in the right perspective, then we'll be in a good place. If we recognize that all of these things are not ends in and of themselves, but rather that they point us to the true thing we were made for, then they're good. But if we allow these things to become the final thing we work towards, then they're always going to become false idols. Think about the easy ways we talk about this. If you make your whole life about making money, you might make the money and not find satisfaction and joy and peace. If you make your whole life about finding a relationship, you might find it and never find peace. If you make your whole life about winning the Olympics, you might win the Olympics, and then for the next 40 years, tell everyone about how you won the Olympics and not have peace. And we can use these examples over and over and over again, not because any of them are wrong, but rather if we allow them to become the thing that we build our lives around, we've missed it. And he gets to this point in this big analogy, which would have been pretty tedious for us to read through, but he starts to use different metaphors, and he's talking about a schoolboy learning Greek. He says when you're teaching a schoolboy to learn Greek, you're trying to teach them the grammar and the alphabet and the vocabulary. And for a long time, this is not an enjoyable experience. Raise your hand if you've learned a foreign language of any kind or tried to, right? Tried to. It's not an enjoyable experience necessarily. Sometimes some people are built for it, but learning it, there's a learning curve and period where it is not fun. Not because of the work that goes into it, but because you don't know what it's for. You're trying to learn how to build words, you're learning conjugations, you're learning all these things, but especially with ancient Greek. And Lewis is talking about like Greek that other philosophers wrote in, not biblical Greek. It's not an enjoyable experience as someone that's learned biblical Greek. Because as you're doing it, you're going, what is this for? Usually, kids ask this about math. I know we've got a few math people in the room, but you know that sensation of going, when will I ever need to know what y equals mx plus b means, right? Slope formula, it's very important. But most people don't use y equals mx plus b every day. Lewis is saying that's what this is like, is a schoolboy learning Greek. And it's hard to convey to this person as you're going through the worst part of learning these formulas and learning these words and learning this new language, that actually it's so that you can read the poets one day and that you can get into the secrets of the world. But you can't trick someone into believing that when they're learning it at 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old. It takes time. You just have to put in the time and effort in the beginning stages so that you can later enjoy it for what it is. He said this metaphor, it breaks down obviously, but in the same way, when we're trying to learn about how to order our desires, the challenge is that many of us, we're not seeing what good there is in selling all we have, giving it to the poor, and following Jesus. When we think about our desires, we don't see what good it is to say, when someone strikes you on the cheek, that you'll turn the other one to them also. We see these complicated, paradoxical things that Jesus said to do. We go, that doesn't make sense. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to do what feels right, or what feels good, or what seems expedient, or makes sense for us to do right now. But he's saying that is not actually how this works. So he lays this out in another area. This is an essay called First and Second Things in a book called God in the Dock. And Lewis is talking about how in all of reality there's this hierarchical nature. Hierarchy meaning things are in order. And so he's saying it's not that we live in a monarchy, though we could say we do, and Christ is king and everyone else is not. He's saying there's an obvious prioritization of the things in our lives, right? And we could come up with our lists right now. If we had more time, I would have us all make lists. But we could say that things like family are more important than your afternoon hobby. Things like your job are more important than, I don't know. Well, I'm not going to tell you what your list should be. But let's say for our students in the room, there's priority of getting your homework done and studying for your tests and going to school to take your tests. And then you get to play your video games or watch TV or read a book after school. For our adults in the room, certainly your spouse should be a higher priority than your, your pickleball afternoon, unless your spouse is involved in pickleball, in which case it can be the same thing. We make our lists all the time. And Lewis says the key to reality is making sure that we have first things first and second things second. If you love a first thing, if you made a list, if you love the number one thing, but you love it in third place, you lose it because you're not loving it properly. If you love a second thing, second place in first place, you lose it. You loved it too much, and you're not loving the first thing enough. This concept making a little bit of sense? Lewis says it's all about how we order the things in our lives. The issue is that we live disordered lives all the time. And all throughout all of Lewis's work, he explores the idea of disordered loves. Now, how could a love be bad? Lewis says, well, it's not that love itself is bad, it's the way that we use our love is bad. One of the examples he uses in a few different places, he talks about very specifically in Mere Christianity, the Great Divorce, and in this essay. He talks about a parent's love for their son, and he talks about a soldier's love for country. He says, a parent's love, if it's overwhelming and spoiling, becomes a burden that is toxic to the child, because now the child is not able to live in the way that they are meant to. He says it can be smothering, it can be overwhelming. He's like, but we don't just see this in parental relationships. We see it all over the place. You know what it's like to love too hard or to receive love that is too much. He says that can be too much. How can love be too much? Well, it actually becomes a self-serving love. He says the same thing with service of country. He's writing very specifically as someone that served in World War I and wrote expediently and aggressively against the Nazis in World War II. He says, love of country is good. Idolization of country is bad. And turning into nationalism in the way that you love your country now has disordered the love. If you allow that to be the end of your love, the final resting place is love of country, you've missed it. It's not that loving a country is bad, it's that loving it too much can be moving it along that scale of first and second things. So you take this concept of first and second things, we apply it everywhere. You love the sport that you play, you love the instruments that you play, you love the books that you read, but if you love them more than the other things, if you prioritize your hobby over your family, if you prioritize your hobby over your God, if you prioritize your scrolling over your God, we can go down all of the lists. He says it's not that these desires are bad. They're just too weak. You're missing what you were made for. So this concept of first and second things, it is really fundamental to what Lewis is talking about throughout all of his works. And he says that the reality is that there's an underlying longing in everything that you enjoy that connects them all. He says it's like a secret thread that connects everything you have ever loved in your life. And this is where I think Lewis wanted to be a poet. He writes very openly about this, and he's very upset that his poetry is just terrible. I think that Lewis is writing some of his most poetic work here in The Weight of Glory when he's talking about heaven. We'll talk about the title and the meaning in a moment. He talks about it in his chapter about heaven in a book called The Problem of Pain. And he talks about it, and he writes very poetically when he's talking about essentially heaven in the Chronicles of Narnia, and he talks about Aslan's country. I just want to read this stretch from The Weight of Glory because I think Lewis does best when he's speaking for himself and not Mike Kramer talking about it for you. Let's see here, 29. Let's get here. If you could only see what these notes look like. He says, one of the issues is that there's this underlying inconsolable secret in each and every one of you. And it's a secret which ends up hurting so much that you take your revenge on it because you call it things like nostalgia and romanticism or adolescence. And it's a secret that pierces with such a sweetness that when, in your intimate conversations, the mention of it becomes imminent, you get awkward and you laugh at yourself. It's a secret that you cannot hide and you cannot tell, even though you desire to do both. We cannot tell it because it's a desire for something that we've never actually seen in our experience, and we cannot hide it because our experience is constantly suggesting it. And we betray ourselves like lovers at the mention of its name. The most common expedient would be to call it beauty and behave as if that settles the matter. This feeling that we get when we enjoy something, it's just beauty. He says Wordsworth identified it as certain moments of his own past, but that was a cheat. Saying that Wordsworth is like, yeah, if we could just get back to the thing, or that sensation of nostalgia. Because Lewis says if you go back to the moments in the past, you'd find not the thing itself, but just a reminder of it. And what you remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. What's he saying? He's saying, you know, when you think about some of your favorite moments, we've got parents in the room, like one of the sweetest moments with your kids, you go, oh, that was the special moment. I wish I could get back to it. Or if you play a sport and you scored a goal, you're like, that was the greatest feeling ever. If I could go back to that moment, you play an instrument, or you have fun with your friends, or you have the best meal you've ever had, and you go, there was a sensation in all of those things that was magical. And if I could just go back to it, then I could experience it again. Lewis says, no. If you went back to it, you would just find a reminder of the actual thing you experienced. The food was a metaphor. The moment with your child was a metaphor. The moment in the sports or the music or the book, they were all glimpses of the real thing you experienced. He says we take revenge on this feeling because we don't know how to put it into words by calling it things like nostalgia. He says the books or the music in which we thought this beauty was located will always betray us if we trust them. It was never in them, it only came through them. And what came through them was longing. And these things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, they're all good images of what we really desire, but if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols. Even good things. Even your favorite Sunday worshiping in the sanctuary can turn into a dumb idol if you let it become the thing itself. He says, they are never the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we've never heard, news from a country we have not yet visited. This is where, think about Narnia and the way that it functions. Lewis says, do you think I'm trying to weave a spell? Perhaps I am, but remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as for inducing them. And you and I have the need for the strongest spell that can be found to wake us from the evil enchantment of worldliness, which has been laid upon us for nearly 100 years. Almost our whole education has been directed to silencing the shy, persistent inner voice in all of us. Almost all our modern philosophies have been devised to convince us that the good of a person is to be found on this earth. And yet the remarkable thing that such philosophies of progress or creative evolution themselves bear a witness to the truth that our real goal has always been elsewhere. He says, when they want to convince you that earth is your home, notice how they set about it. They begin by trying to persuade you that earth can be made into heaven, and thus it gives you a sop to your sense of exile in the earth as it is. Next, they'll tell you that the fortunate event is still a good way off in the future, so you should just enjoy yourself now. And finally, you're longing for the trans-temporal, the things that are beyond time. They should awake, and they'll spoil the whole affair. So Lewis is saying that the issue is that people want you to think that the things that you enjoy now are the end, but they're just images of what we were made to enjoy. This language of them being images that things, that the true thing came through is really important. We talked about the essay, First and Second Things. There's another really crucial essay he talks about called Meditations in a Tool Shed that we're going to come back to in a moment. But he talks about, in The Problem of Pain, when he's writing about heaven, he says that the true joy we were made for, it's like a secret thread connecting all the things. And think about you as a personal, individual. All of we'll use music, right? I like a very eclectic array of music of all kinds of genres. You go, how is this connected to that? And the connection is who God made me to be. That's the simplest way to connect them. And you go, well, Mike, you like hiking in the outdoors. You probably also like, this other thing. I don't like that other thing. You're like, that's weird. I thought those things were connecting. It's like, well, not for me. For each of us, we have these secret threads that connect all of the things that you love. And Lewis would say that we don't even know how to put it into words why this is your favorite show and this is your favorite activity, but there is an unspeakable connection. And I could give you a bunch of examples with another day or a couple hours of why what one of my favorite shows speaks to the same sensation as what it means to be out in nature. But Lewis is pointing to the thread is the Spirit. The thread of the Spirit connecting these things is this longing to be one with God. And as we're looking for this longing to attach our desires to the true object of our desire, we're ordering them in the proper way and we're putting them in their proper place. Lewis is constantly trying to remind us that we cannot miss that the object is not within our grasp. So Mere Christianity is one of those famous quotes they throw on pillows all the time, but it's really crucial. Lewis says, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, then the only logical conclusion is that I was made for another world. These earthly pleasures are not bad. Your enjoyment of things it's not bad. It's that if we view the enjoyment as the goal, we're going to miss it. And remember the language of first and second things. If you treat these enjoyments of things as the most important thing, you're going to lose it. You're not even going to be able to enjoy it properly. Think about when you eat your favorite dessert and you go, that was amazing. I'll have 7 more. Rarely do we, after 7 brownies, go, that was worth it. Usually you go, I wish I stopped 2 brownies ago. And you can fill in your dessert of choice. The reason being that sometimes our desires, which in the brownie analogy, you'd say your desire was too great. It's like, no, it was too weak. You were settling for this sensation, when in reality, the desire is for something else. The joy that comes through eating your favorite dessert, that's real. And every real joy you experience on this side of heaven is going to be in its full consummation in heaven. That's part of what we believe in the Gospels. But when we settle for less then, when we make these small joys into the final joy, as opposed to viewing the final joy as something else, that is, being with God, we will miss it. And Lewis says this is the entire history of humanity. He goes on talking about this more and more and talking about the tension of glory, this notion of what does glory mean, and talks about what it means to live a glorified life. He says the notion of pleasing God, to be loved and delighted in as a artist delights in his work, it seems like a weight or burden of glory which only our thoughts can hardly sustain, but so it is. Lewis says a glorified life is what we were made for, and it's the only thing that can satisfy us. The tension is that it's something that makes us reckon with the reality that we've been searching for fulfillment and direction in all these different places, but Lewis is arguing that when we're thinking about heaven, his contention is that all we are, apart from our sins, this is straight out of the Way to Glory, everything that you are is destined, if you will let God have his way, to utter satisfaction. The question is if we'll let God have his way. Everything that you enjoy, everything that you are, every instinct that you have, if you allow God to have God's way in your life, is meant for utter satisfaction. But if you decide to remain as a little kid in the mud with no concept of what utter satisfaction could truly be, if you believe the mud is where you should stay, mud pies are fun. Getting dirty in the outdoors is fun. But if you believe that's the end, you will get what you want. Lewis is very keen through all of his work to say, God gives you what you want. We'll come back to this in Narnia briefly. The problem of pain, as he's talking about this a bit more directly, or The Great Divorce, rather. The Great Divorce is another book that I assume people haven't read, but it's this metaphor for the afterlife. And imagine you get to the afterlife and you're just in this in-between place, and you're allowed to decide what you do with the afterlife. And Lewis is trying to explore all the ways why, if you knew heaven existed, but you decided not to go in, what would make you not want to go in? And fundamentally, there's like 8 or 9 ghosts that are dealing with this idea of like, well, what's in there? What's in there for me? Because I know what I want out here. And Lewis, it's this weird idea that in The Great Divorce, that the ghosts, if you just imagine something, you can have it. He says this is a really crucial issue. That the trouble is, this is from the narrator in The Great Divorce in the early chapters. He says the trouble with these people is they have no needs. The need is with a capital N. He says this idea that if you could just imagine whatever you want right now and you got it, then you'd probably be satisfied, right? You could get all the money you want. You could get the biggest house you want, the amount of land you want. You could do whatever you want and create everything that you have, and then you'll be satisfied. And what Lewis explores in The Great Divorce is if you did that for infinity, for eternity, you would eventually be miserable if you just got what you want all the time. There's a great episode of The Twilight Zone that is really eerie this way. To the teens in the room, The Twilight Zone is a really trippy show about... Can't even get into it. All right, you should watch it maybe. But this episode of The Twilight Zone... this guy is running from the cops, the opening scene, and the cops are chasing him, and you hear a gunshot, and he wakes up, and he's in this mansion, in a casino hotel. And there's a butler there, and he's like, yes, here you are. And he's like, did I die? He said, yeah, you died. He said, but this looks really nice. He went, it is really nice. And he's like, you can have whatever you want. Just think about it. He goes, really? He's like, well, I want food, and I want drinks, and I want this, I want that. He's like, okay, boom, boom, boom. It all appears. So the episode goes on. He goes down to the casino. He's playing blackjack. He says, I bet it all. He gets blackjack. He wins $1 million. He goes, I go to the craps table. He starts betting on the craps table. He wins $1 million. He goes to the slot machines. He wins. And days go by, and you see him go out the next morning, and he looks depressed. And he goes over to bet, and he wins, and everyone's cheering for him, and he's miserable. And he goes to eat food, and it's the same delectable food he's eaten every day, and he eats the food, and he's miserable. It doesn't taste good anymore. And he's got all these beautiful people with him cheering him on, and he's miserable. And he finally, in the end of the episode, he talks to the butler. He goes, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Take me to the other place. Like, I'm miserable. And in a very creepy, terrifying way, the butler goes, oh, you are in the other place. And he laughs, and it's the end of the episode. It's the same concept, though. If you got everything that you wanted, the lie we tell ourselves is if you just make enough more money, or if you could just be healthy enough, or if you could just be fit enough, or if you just had enough friends, or if you just fill in the blank, then you'd be happy. And what Lewis says is actually, behind every one of those things is more longing, because that's not actually what you're longing for. There are good things you can want, but that's not the fundamental thing undergirding everything that you like and everything that you want. Lewis says in The Magician's Nephew of Chronicles of Narnia, which is the prequel to the building of Narnia, you see in this book the creation of Narnia, kind of like Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. And in Lewis's depiction of this, there's this interaction between the White Witch that you find later, the antagonist in the story, and she had gotten these superpowers by eating the fruit of the garden. And the main character is so upset. He goes, I'm so sorry, Aslan. I'm so sorry she got the fruit. She can do whatever she wants now. And Aslan goes, yeah, that's true. She got the fruit. She got the strength. And as he's explaining to the children why not to worry about it, they go, well, is she going to really be as strong as we think? He says, yes. And this is the quote from The Magician's Nephew. He says, things always work according to their nature. She has won her heart's desire, but length of days, eternal life, with an evil heart is only length of misery, and already she has begun to know it. All will get what they want, but they do not always like it. Lewis is saying that we may get to have our dumb idols in the end. If you want to make brownies the most important thing in your life, they will be, and you will enjoy them as much as possible, but they'll just be a dumb idol. You may not end up liking the things that you end up getting. And it's for this reason that Lewis says he believes that some will ultimately remain rebels to the end. In a spiritual sense, he says that the doors of hell are locked from the inside. It's one of those controversial things that Lewis said that I think is very accurate. He explores this in a couple places in the Chronicles of Narnia, particularly with the dwarves, but this idea that he can't force someone to want to be in the presence of God. We all choose. We're taking a gamble of faith that we either believe that a life with God is what we were made for, or we don't believe that. And he says that some will remain rebels to the end, meaning that some will never concede that point. And how could a loving God force his love upon us? Now, Lewis talks about this. It's a conversation for another day, but it gets a little bit more complicated than this in the way that he explores what this will look like in the afterlife. But the notion of saying hell is a door locked from the inside means that it's a door that we can choose to walk through whenever we choose to, but that God does not force himself upon us. And it's one of the crucial things that Lewis is talking about. We talked about earlier with first and second things and this language of all of the things we enjoy and love, that they're good images about what the thing we love comes through. 1 Corinthians 13 is where Paul's, it's the chapter we read at weddings typically. We also read it, the back half, at funerals a lot. But here's a line that this beauty that we're longing for, that it is something that we were made for. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13 that this process is called like moving from the partial to the complete. He's saying that right now, on this side of heaven, we look through a mirror dimly. So think about a mirror after the shower is gone and it's all foggy. You can see a shape of yourself, but you can't see, your face the same way to put your makeup on or to do your hair. Some of us can save time on doing our hair. But when you're looking in a mirror dimly, you've got an idea, but you don't see the thing. Paul says, on this side of heaven, that's how it is. But in heaven, you will see it in fullness. He says, right now, you know in part, then you'll know in full. He says, when you were a child, he thought like a child and ate like a child and acted like a child. But when he grew up, he put away childish things. He says this idea of moving from the partial to the complete, that is what we were made for. Faith, hope, and love abide, but the greatest of these is love. To me, that's what Paul is writing about there is what Lewis is talking about, is that all our life is about trying to move from the partial to the complete. And our desires are only partial right now. And where he talks about this is this other essay called The Meditations in a Toolshed. He says this journey, when we get glimpses of the joy, and we see them properly, he says, we realize it's here at last is the thing I was made for. When you really, in real time, enjoy something to its fullest extent, it is a blissful feeling. And notice that the things that you enjoy most in your life that give you the most overwhelming sense of satisfaction are typically not the things you spent the most money on. It's not the biggest vacation or the best car or the best game or the best fill in the blank. It's usually very ordinary moments. It's laughing with the people you care about most. It's a closeness and an intimacy. Lewis says these are all the things that give us a true glimpse of the reality. But in this essay, Meditations in a Toolshed, he says he's walking out into his yard. He goes into this old, rickety old toolshed. He opens the door, and the roof is letting light come through. We've talked about this before down here. He says he sees this beam of light, and he looks at the light. And he says the experience of looking at the light is one very distinct experience. He says he can describe the light. Okay, it's a yellow beam coming through this dingy old shed. And even as he looks into the beam of light, he can see little dust particles floating through. And when he looks through the light, he can see the stuff behind it. Does that make sense? You can see the tools in the tool shed. He says looking at the thing is one very distinct experience. But then he talks about stepping into the light, and he starts to look along the light. And when he looks along the beam of light, he sees out of the tool shed, and out of the tool shed he sees a tree, and beyond the tree he sees the sky, and 90-some million miles after that he can see the sun. He says looking at a thing and looking along the thing are two very distinctive experiences. This is the through line of Lewis's work. Desire and longing and distinguishing between looking at a thing and looking along a thing. Looking at God is memorizing facts. That's important. Reading the Bible is important. Learning theology is important. Looking at the thing is a very distinctive experience. Describing what you see, very important. But describing something from afar and being literally in it is a very different thing. Experiencing the love of God, looking along the light, to look out beyond your present experience to see what you were made for, is a very distinct experience. And Lewis uses like 3 examples. We're running out of time, so the one that is easiest to describe, he says, think about 2 people that have fallen in love. People on the outside of that love, they look at it and go, these young kids, they don't know what they're in for. Wait until 30 years of marriage, then you'll know what you're in for. Look at them, they're sharing their food. You don't share food, this is so preposterous. From the outside, when you're describing someone else falling in love, there's all kinds of words you use, because it's not your experience. But from the inside, trying to convey what is this sensation that is being experienced, this love, this overwhelming bubbling up of joy that is shared. It's a completely different thing. And you can only describe it if you're on the inside of it. If you, as a scientist, try to explain that, well, it's actually a chemical reaction going on in your brain, and that is true in one sense. And in another sense, it is completely misunderstood what the process and experience of falling in love is like. And Lewis says this is what it's all about, is not to settle for looking at things, but to look along them. And again, this sensation is what is described through all of Lewis's work. And this is the challenge, is that as we're thinking about this notion of the weight of glory, the title of this sermon, Lewis says he was never interested in the way heaven was described in the Bible. Golden gates and roads that are paved with gemstones, that's not really interesting. So when we talk about the way that the Bible talks about us being in heaven with God and being in the presence of God, we can either settle for that or we can take Jesus at his word. And what he talks about is that we will be glorified, which is a strange idea. What does it mean to be glorified? And Lewis is talking about this notion of God taking delight in you. That quote I read earlier, it's as an artist taking delight in their own art. What could be more important? It's a famous line, it's not so important what you think of God, but much more so what God thinks of you. It's the fundamental thing we should be concerned about. For Lewis, when he's talking about this notion of us being glorified, he says it is weighty, that to carry this burden or this weight of God glorifying you, of God taking pleasure in you. It's something that you carry with you because you recognize that everything you do does matter. All of the desires that you let into your life and experience, they matter. The way that you treat one another matters. And this is where one of those other famous lines from The Weight of Glory comes from, and we'll end with this. But he's talking about the way that we embrace and interact with our neighbors. He says this. He says, it may be possible for each of us to think a little too much of our potential glory that'll come along. But it's hardly possible for you to think too much of your neighbor's glory. The load or the weight or the burden of your neighbor's glory should be laid on your back, a load so heavy that only humility can carry it, and the backs of the proud will be broken. It's a serious thing to live in a society of potential gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you can talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it right now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror or a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. Pause there for a moment. Lewis is saying that on the other side of heaven, when we are glorified, you will be ruling angels. That's what Scripture says. He says, you will be glorified and lifted up. And right now, if you were as you are to be, you'd be tempted to worship one another because of how holy we will become. He says, but you can't dwell on it too long. That's the trap of it. But if you dwell on your neighbor's potential glory, suddenly life becomes far more significant. You're worried about making sure your neighbor is dignified. You're making sure that your neighbor is cared for. You're making sure you remind yourself that your neighbor was made in the image of God. And in caring for your neighbor's glory, you are actually becoming more holy yourself by doing the things you were made for. Lewis says, all day long we are in some degree helping each other get to the destination. And it's in light of all these overwhelming possibilities, with awe and circumspection proper to them, that we should conduct all of our dealings with one another, all of our friendships and our loves and our play and our politics. There are no ordinary people. You've never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals with whom we joke and work and marry and snub and exploit. Immortal horrors and everlasting splendors. And this doesn't mean that we're supposed to be perpetually solemn, but instead we should remember we should play, but in our merriment, it must be of a certain kind that exists between people that have from the outset taken each other seriously. There shouldn't be flippancy or superiority or presumption. And all of our charity must be a real and costly love with deep feelings for the sins in spite of which we love the sinner. We don't have mere tolerance or indulgence with parodies of love as flippancies and parodies of merriment. Next to the blessed sacrament itself, meaning taking communion. This is the crucial piece for Lewis. It's the last line of this sermon. Next to the blessed sacrament of communion itself, your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses. In the physical world, the holiest thing next to taking communion is your neighbor. It says, if he is your Christian neighbor, then they are holy in almost the same way. For in him also Christ lives, the glorifier and the glorified. Glory himself is truly hidden. In the weight of glory, what Lewis is getting at is that everything we desire, everything that we care about, everything that we enjoy is connected. And if we allow it, it will point us to the true thing that we've always longed for. And if we allow it, it will turn us away. Everything has the capacity to draw us closer to or push us further from God, depending on our relationship with it. And the language from the Chronicles of Narnia, Magician's Nephew, is that all will get what they want in the end. Not all will like it. This notion that hell is a door locked from the inside, and not in the way that we think about it, but rather, if you want for the rest of eternity to settle for something less than your relationship with God, God allows you to do that. It just won't satisfy you. And what could be more unsatisfactory than not living for the thing you were made for? So the weight of glory is this invitation for us to reconfigure our perspective, especially in response to the church, capital C, around the world saying, oh, well, it's because you desire all the wrong things. It's like, no, your desire is real and true and good and human. But just like plants in the wild, we have to learn how to prune them and tame them and control them, or it will be overrun and overgrown and unhealthy. We have to learn how to order our desires, how to put them in their proper place so that we can live the way we were called to. And ultimately, the thing we are living towards is a glorified life. So my charge to you, even though it's not a sermon, though I'm sure it sounded like one, is to try to read The Weight of Glory, and then if you can stomach it, you can talk to me about it after. But that's all we have time for this morning. Thanks for listening very attentively, and that's all. I'd love to close us in prayer. Let's do that. God, thank you for this morning. Thank you for this time to be together. And thank you, Lord, for your love. Your love that permeates us, that connects us in community, but also your love that we encounter in the things that we love. Lord, that you speak to us through art and through friendship and through marriage and through sports and music and food, that you make your joy known to us. Open our eyes and our ears and our senses to all the places that you have revealed yourself so that we can come to know you better. And Lord, help us to love these things as you intended us to, that we might draw close to you and in doing so draw others close to you. In the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen.